Welcome to another edition of Beat Diabetes, our Books and Quotes edition, or our Books and Quotes series. And today we're going to continue with Dr. Richard Bernstein's Diabetes Solution. By the way, he became a medical doctor. He wrote articles. He was so excited about when he found out he could keep his glucose in a normal range by a diet of low carbohydrate and by giving himself small amounts of insulin. He was a type 1, so he had to inject insulin. And he wrote about this. Nobody wanted to pay attention. He was totally ignored. So finally, it's like, all right, if they're going to ignore me as an engineer, I'll get a degree in medicine. I'll become a doctor, and then they won't be able to ignore me anymore. And today, he's not too much ignored. A lot of people love him, people hate him, but hardly anybody ignores him. So we're going to go on with some of the quotes from this book. Today, I wanted to share a little chart. I won't post this, but let me just tell you about it that he gives in his book. He talks about insulin resistance. It's kind of amazing because he was figuring things out about insulin resistance that a lot of people are just starting to realize today. And a lot of the newer guys in the low-carb movement are talking about insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia. And back in the 90s when he wrote this book, he had it pretty well nailed down. So he gives a kind of a chart of how it all works, and he starts with, at the very top of the chart, the beginning of insulin resistance is truncal obesity. Truncal means from the trunk, from the belly. And so if you've got a larger than normal stomach, chances are you've got a liver with fat in it, fatty liver. And he's saying that's where diabetes tends to start. Type 2, now type 1 is a different animal. But for type 2, truncal obesity, he says that leads to insulin resistance. And then with the help of a high-carb diet, which creates a hunger for more carbs, which leads to higher insulin. So he's like, obesity in the stomach is where it begins. It goes to insulin resistance. It creates high glucose. It creates hunger. You're eating more. You're getting fatter. Your belly's getting bigger. And he says it creates excessive insulin production, or the word we use these days is hyperinsulinemia. And he says that tends to cause beta cell burnout. Now, some disagree with that. They say it doesn't really burn out the beta cells. It just covers them with fat to where they don't function anymore. And I'm not sure I know what the answer is. Doctors disagree about that. But one way or the other, your beta cell doesn't work. Beta cells aren't working. Some say they're dead. Some say they're just covered with fat and they could be revived. I don't know, but the result is you don't function well in processing carbohydrates. So for some people, if they can lose some weight and if they can go to a low-carb diet and they're not hungry so much, they lose the liver fat. And things get a whole lot better, and they actually become more efficient at processing carbs. So kudos to Dr. Richard Bernstein for figuring that out long before most of the other doctors and low-carb folks did. Now, this one section here that I'm going to quote part of it and read part of it is very powerful to me. And when I first read it, it really stood out. Now, as I mentioned last time, this book, this Diabetes Solution by Dr. Richard Bernstein, it is not exactly user-friendly. And there's parts of it you're probably not going to be able to even wade through. If you're a type 1, there's parts of it that will deal with that. If you're a type 2, you're like, well, I don't need to know that. But there's others, he just gets so complex and so complicated, you're like, well, okay, but could you just give it to me in nice bite-sized pieces, please? Anyway, this part, everybody can get, everybody can understand. He says, you're holding a coarse ground, brown piece of whole grain bread. He says, sugar? This is sugar? And then he answers the question, in a word, it is, after you digest it. No, it's not sugar when it's in your hand. And when you bite a piece of bread, it doesn't taste like sugar. It doesn't taste sweet. But after you digest it, it will become sugar in your body. We've talked about that many times, but he had this down in 1997. He says, with some important exceptions, carbohydrates Foods derived primarily from plant sources, such as vegetables, grains, and fruits, have the same effect on blood glucose levels as table sugar does. Now, that's an astonishing declaration. He's saying, look around at some of these foods that you love so much. They're not much different than table sugar. They'll raise your blood sugar just as high. He says, and this is the quote that to me seems so powerful. He says, whether you eat a piece of the nuttiest whole grain bread or drink a Coke or have a dollop of mashed potatoes, the effect on blood glucose levels is the same. Blood sugar rises fast. And I found out the exact same thing, not only because I read this from Dr. Bernstein, but I found out from using my own meter, a couple of generations down the line, when I was struggling with blood sugar. I was amazed to find that eating a potato is not much different than eating table sugar or eating a piece of bread. They all raise blood sugar like crazy. And if somebody asks me, what do you suppose is the biggest piece of information that helps diabetics that watch your channel? And we get testimonies by the thousands. I mean, we hear from people every day, it seems like, about how much watching my channel has helped. And if you ask me why do you suppose that is? I think the number one thing they learn is they learn that it's not just sugar that's their problem. Their problem is carbohydrates in whatever form it is. So whether it's a piece of whole grain bread or whether it's a sweet potato or whether it's a white potato, if it's got a lot of carbs in it, it's a problem. And a lot of them didn't know that. Their doctor never told them. Their nutritionist never told them. And because they didn't test blood sugar after their meals, about an hour to an hour and a half after eating, they never realized it. Then they watch some of my channels and they wonder, well, is he even telling the truth? Or is he just a big liar? And so they get out their handy-dandy little friendly neighborhood glucose meter and they have a meal with a lot of carbs to it, but maybe no sugar. No dessert, but maybe a big piece of bread and some mac and cheese. And they test their blood sugar and they're shocked and they're like, wow, Dennis was right. This really does affect my blood sugar and I didn't even taste a single thing that was sweet. To me, that's probably the greatest little piece of information people get that helps them overcome their diabetes and get that A1C down. So, and I'll just keep saying it and singing it like a song over and over again because people need to hear it. And every year that goes by, there's a whole new crop of diabetics that come forth in America, India, China, Japan, Mexico, the Philippines, all over the world. Every year there's a new crop. It's just kind of like every year there's a new group of graduates that graduate from high school. And there's a whole new group of graduates that graduate from college. Well, there's a whole new group of graduates all over the world every single year that have graduated into diabetes. They graduated from pre-diabetes or maybe not even that, and now their doctor says they're diabetic. So they get hold of my channel, and that's why I don't apologize for continuing to repeat some of these things again and again. They need to hear it. And I can't always count on them going back to my very first videos, which you can do, by the way, by clicking that uploads link that's in all of my descriptions. But they often won't do that. But if they catch these videos, they'll get it. So he lists some no-nos in this book, things that you really ought not to be eating. And I just wanted to go over 4 of the vegetables he lists and then add one of my own. Normally speaking, vegetables are good for diabetics. They're not nearly so bad as fruits or as grains or as pasta. So vegetables are a good choice, normally speaking, but there are some that aren't really so good. One would be beets. He writes, like most other sweet-tasting vegetables, beets are loaded with sugar. Beets are a source of table sugar. So beets, a lot of sugar. Carrots. He says, after cooking, carrots taste sweeter and appear to raise blood sugar much more rapidly than when raw. If you're going to eat a carrot, chop up a raw carrot, just a smaller one, put it in your salad. You can usually do pretty well that way. But when you eat cooked carrots, they just get sweeter as you cook them. So avoid carrots. 3, corn. Well, Some people say, well, corn isn't really a vegetable, it's a grain, but we think of it as a vegetable. And Mama, a lot of times when she tells her children, eat your vegetables, and here, have some corn on your plate. Here's your vegetable for tonight. Not a good choice for diabetics. It is going to raise your blood sugar too much. Fourthly, and of course, this is really the big one. This is the monster, and that is potatoes. And they come in so many forms. And mashed potatoes, fried potatoes. My mom used to make some of the greatest fried potatoes. I don't eat those anymore. French fries come from potatoes. So many different potato products that we eat in America and really all over the world. Potatoes are not your friend. They are your enemy. And I know everybody says we're all different and things will affect us differently, and there's some truth to that. But you would be an extremely rare diabetic or pre-diabetic if you can get by eating potatoes in any form at all. And that includes sweet potatoes. And yeah, I know they're not a true potato, but they look like a potato, act like a potato, and for all practical purposes, raise blood sugar like a potato. You'd be a rare diabetic if you can eat any form of potatoes and it not affect your blood sugar significantly. And if you're way up there with an A1C of 8, 9, 10, 12, just say sayonara, adios, goodbye to the potatoes. And then I'll add one more of my own. He doesn't mention this, but green peas are not good for diabetics. They are basically a kind of a starchy vegetable. They have a lot of carbs. So there are things you're going to have to avoid. If you think you can get through the process of beating diabetes and not make some serious sacrifices, you're wrong. But the good news, my friend, is there are so many options and choices and substitutes and alternatives for some of the high-carb foods you've enjoyed. You can do it, and you can enjoy yourself, and you can create a diet and a menu for life. There's a good one to remember, a menu for life, a series of meals, and it will increase continually the more you research. That will do you good all your life and will not raise your blood sugar. And you will no longer be diabetic according to the numbers. And we've heard so many testimonies of doctors that say, well, you're no longer diabetic. Now, I know people will argue about that and say, well, you really are diabetic. You're just avoiding it. However you want to call it. When the complications go, when the numbers go down, and when the A1C is in the 5s and the fasting glucose is 100 or less, you're doing pretty well.
If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our Uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our Uploads page is in the description.